HBO's The Last of Us Season 1 has just wrapped up, and at the end of the day, it is an almost good video game adaptation. I was actually wrong when I said this was a completely pointless adaptation. No, it has a purpose, and that purpose is to quote-unquote correct the mistakes of the original game. Originally, it was rumored that last year's remaster would change the original story to suit Neil Druckmann's vision. And thankfully that rumor was incorrect. Instead, HBO's Last of Us is his true vision for what he wanted the first game to be. And to nobody's surprise, at least to the people who've been paying attention since The Last of Us 2 released, it is inferior to the game in every way. Now, because I decided to stop covering this episodically, I will very briefly give my thoughts on every episode and then give you my opinion of the season as a whole. Now, of course, for episodes 1 through 3, I already covered them in detail, so go check out those videos if you'd like to hear my extended thoughts. But basically, long story short, race swapping is bad and will always be bad. There is no context in which it's good. And if it doesn't matter, then why did they change it? You know it matters. The showrunners know it matters. That's why they did it. Of course, then we have the Bella Ramsey situation, which I think I've said enough already, but I will say once again, this was absolutely a miscast, and it is incredibly distracting every time the camera zooms in on her face. Other than that, most of my criticisms of episode 1 and 2 are nothing too major. But then we get to episode 3, which derailed the entire show, wasted everyone's time, for a gay love story plot that wasn't in the original game at all, completely ruining any subtlety around Bill whatsoever, and ultimately had nothing to do with the apocalypse at all. So now that we're 3 episodes in, and Joel and Ellie have barely gotten to know each other, they don't like each other at all, I think this is about the point that Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin realized that Ellie was completely unlikable up until this point. So now in between episodes, her character just magically changes, becomes much more like the Ellie from the games, more playful, more friendly, and so they try to salvage her character from this point forward. I'm gonna be honest with you, they still failed. Not nearly enough time was spent this season with Joel and Ellie slowly building up their relationship. And you could say that's part of the video game adaptation process, but the entire point of the game is that we as a player get more attached to Ellie over the course of the game, which helps us understand Joel's decision at the end. So if you drop the ball on this incredibly important story component, then the adaptation is completely fucked. You screwed up. Time to go back to the drawing board. These next 2 episodes use the time that the player would be fighting off this clan of bandits or scavengers, whatever you want to call them, and instead fleshes them out and turns them into their own faction, essentially, who rebelled against Fedra in the region. And they are led by this short, fat woman with a high-pitched voice who is not intimidating in the least.
There. Have I satisfied the necessary conditions for you to talk?
This is the most immersion-breaking thing that has happened so far. Do you really expect me to believe in an apocalypse situation where the quote-unquote fascist military faction has been dissolved in this region, which means it is lawless, that the rebels are going to follow this tiny fat woman who shows no leadership skills over the next 2 episodes whatsoever? She just barks orders at people and is grumpy the whole time. This is so fucking stupid, and they did this on purpose. If you don't think every miscast in this show was done on purpose, you're wrong. You can call me a conspiracy theorist all you fucking want. It's not going to change reality that this was done on purpose to warp your mind, to insert ideas in your head, falsehoods that do not represent reality in any way, all in the name of equality or some supposedly altruistic goal that will never happen because it doesn't represent biological reality. This was just fucking idiotic, and it was a complete waste of time. They could have handled it exactly the way the game did, and you would lose nothing of value. And these 2 episodes also represent a much larger problem with this show, in that there's almost no action whatsoever. Now, you could say gameplay is not really canon. That is a debate that goes on a lot with story-based games. but I think it really takes away from this epic quest or adventure or Herculean task to go across the country if they only fight zombies, like 3 or 4 times over the course of the show, and there's only a couple evil human faction groups, and they only get in a handful of gunfights over the course of 9 episodes. This show really wants to be The Walking Dead, but slightly better written, where it's not actually about zombies, it's about interpersonal relationships between humans, and moral ambiguity and all that shit. Which would be fine if there were still people trying to kill each other, but so much of this time is Joel and Ellie just hiding, and eventually when they find Henry and Sam, that part is done mostly well. I don't really have complaints. Well, besides the obvious one that Sam is deaf for no reason and has been aged down, I suppose to change the relationship between Ellie and Sam from being one of 2 kids around the same age to Ellie trying to take care of a smaller child, I guess. If I had to compliment something from episode 4, I'd say the scene where Joel finishes off the paralyzed kid reveals a bit of his ruthlessness that he had in the game. And shortly afterward, Joel teaching Ellie how to hold a gun was a kind of nice moment, I suppose. Cutting out the encounter with the truck that had a mounted machine gun on it was kind of lame, but they slightly made up for it with a version of the sniper encounter in the next episode. Though all the infected erupting out of the ground, and the chick not just shooting Henry when she has him right where she wants him, has to do like her evil villain monologue thing, except it's supposed to be all emotional and deep. No, it's functionally the same as a stupid villain dramatically mocking the hero and then getting killed. And also the tweak to the end of Henry and Sam's story where Ellie knows that Sam's infected is also very stupid and adds nothing of value to the story. So I'd say episode 4 and 5 are just okay. They're not bad. They're not really good either. I guess I was mostly entertained outside of the tiny rebel leader woman. That shit was cringe. Now if it was a roided out monster like Abby leading the rebels, maybe I would believe it. Now episode 6 is where it goes to shit again. It starts off with Joel giving his name to 2 boomers that he has at gunpoint. And you could say, okay, maybe that'll have no consequences, but there's a reason why you shouldn't give your name to strangers in this apocalypse situation. For those of you who've played The Last of Us Part 2, you might think of one reason why. Shortly afterward, Joel and Ellie arrive outside of Jackson. Yes, Jackson, not the power plant from the game. And the survivors there use a dog to sniff out if someone's infected that they find. And of course, there's this big build-up dramatic tension moment because the dog is not sure if Ellie's infected or not. And honestly, I didn't really have a problem with this. Obviously, you could argue it was pointless. There's no way the dog was going to bite Ellie because then the show's fucking over. There's no way Joel could kill all of them. But whatever, it's far from the biggest problem this episode. So now Joel has finally reunited with his brother Tommy, and he's married a black woman. I'm not going to do what I did for the first episode review, because apparently facts make people uncomfortable. But let's just say I'm a noticer, and I'm noticing right now. You want to know another thing I noticed? That apparently Jackson is a communist community, even though they have democratically elected officials. Figure that one out. And once again, the show has us suspend our disbelief that people would honestly vote for this woman to be the leader. And there's even a cameo from Big Schnoz herself. Truly my favorite character from The Last of Us Part 2. But honestly, what's even worse than Jackson being a communist community is that yet another classic masculine hero character has been emasculated. In these last 2 episodes, it looks like Joel's having a heart attack or a stroke. They're not quite clear as to what it is. Until now, they explain he's been having panic attacks because he doesn't think he can deliver Ellie because he's getting too old. Does this sound anything like the Joel from the game? Fuck no. You're lying to yourself if you still think this Joel is anything like the original at this point. This is a pathetic shell of a man, which is what I've been saying since like episode fucking 2 in these reviews. There is no way that Pedro Pascal's Joel would have survived 20 years with this personality type. And you could argue, okay, maybe he was beaten down over all those years, but not once in this show does he act like the vicious Joel, the ruthless Joel that we know from the original game. The fact that he cries, he actually cries, man. I don't have a problem with male characters crying when it feels earned. This is not earned, it comes out of nowhere. The idea here is that they're changing the context as to why Joel wants Tommy to take Ellie the rest of the way to the Fireflies. In the original game, it's because Joel was getting too attached to Ellie and he couldn't let himself love her like he loved his daughter. In the show, it's more like he already loves her, which again is not earned because the characters haven't had enough interactions. It just feels like a switch was magically flipped off screen. And so, of course, Ellie is listening to this conversation, and instead of running away and Joel and Tommy have to chase her down and kill some more evil raiders, of course, there's no fucking action in this show, so instead we just skip to one of my favorite moments from the game. But of course, the acting is inferior in every way to the original. I'll just show you a side-by-side here.
What do you want from me?
Admit that you wanted to get rid of me the whole time.
I came here to talk to you.
No way, you're still here. If you're gonna ditch me, ditch me.
Tommy knows this area
Oh,
better
fuck
than...
that.
Well, I'm sorry. I trust him better than I trust myself.
Stop with the bullshit. What are you so afraid of?
I made this decision for your own good. You'll be way better off with Tommy. He knows the area better than I do.
Do you give a shit about me or not?
Of course I do.
Then what are you so afraid of? That I'm gonna end up like Sam? I can't get infected. I can take care of myself.
How many close calls have we had?
Well, we seem to be doing all right so far.
And now you'll be doing even better with Tommy.
I'm not her, you know.
What?
Maria told me about Sarah.
Ellie?
You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
I'm not her, you know. Maria told me about Sarah and...
No. Don't say another word.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel, but I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel. But I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everybody I have cared for has either died or left me. Everybody fucking except for you! So don't tell me that I'd be safe with somebody else, because the truth is, I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad. You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
And then, magically, overnight, Joel decides, no, he is good enough to take her across the state. And since there's no evil raiders, no action, no killing, no moment of realization that only he's good enough to take her across the country, again, it just doesn't feel earned. Then at the end of the episode, we skip ahead. They reach the university. Of course, the Fireflies aren't there. We see the escaped monkeys that were experimented on. And we finally get a moment of confrontation with just one guy. Joel barely wins a 1v1 and gets stabbed by a broken baseball bat. How do we go from the game Joel killing hundreds of people and infected to the show version maybe killing a dozen of each over the course of the entire season? Is it more realistic? Yes. But it is also way more boring, and contributes to this Joel just being far inferior and pathetic and weak, and it makes it seem like luck is the only reason he was able to deliver Ellie across the country. This is what happens when you go from a video game to a TV show. Is it arguably a better medium to cover a game story than movies? I would say yes. But because this season is only 9 episodes long, this ends up feeling like a Cliff's Notes of the first game. For all these people saying they can finally enjoy the story of The Last of Us with their parents, did you really come out of this feeling like it was the actual story from the games? Gameplay itself can be an important part of video game storytelling. To me, it's the most important part by far, given that video games are an interactive medium. So when you actually cut out all of the gameplay, they don't even attempt to convert 95% of the encounters into a scene in the show, that contributes to it being a bad adaptation. I feel like if you're arguing otherwise, you don't even really like video games, do you? You just want to play an interactive movie, which explains why Sony games are so popular these days. Then we get to episode 7. The second time the entire plot gets derailed. At least this time it was a canon story, though I couldn't even tell you how accurate it is because I refuse to this day to actually play the Left Behind DLC, as not only is this when Neil Druckmann took over the story of The Last of Us, but it's also an underage lesbian love story. Give me a single reason I should care about this. For all the people who told me wanting Atreus and Angrboda to show any kind of romantic interest in each other is pedophilia, you guys sure do love your underage lesbian love stories. I know calling you people a hypocrite is a waste of fucking time. You have no standards, you have no ethics, you have no morality. If your side does it, it's okay. If my side does it, it's bad. I get it. That's been drilled into my head for like 8 years at this point. So I think actually reviewing this episode is a waste of time, much like actually reviewing episode 3 would be a waste of time. We all know why this exists. It's virtue signaling, it's normalization, it's propaganda, you know. And hopefully, eventually, the normies will wake up and smell the roses with this shit, but probably not. So I really have no sympathy for them at this point. So on to episode 8. This one was actually almost a great adaptation, if not for one little subtle change in there, that again, I think most people probably didn't even notice. But the cannibal pedo is also a Christian priest, but a fake priest, as he was a teacher before the apocalypse and claims he found God. But guess what? It's all bullshit. How many times have we seen this trope before? I know I've seen it several times already. And it's always a priest. You're never gonna see an evil rabbi, I can promise you that. But honestly, other than this small change, it was decently faithful to the game, I'll say that. Any problems that I might have had with this episode's story or the sequence of the game honestly isn't really even worth mentioning. Yeah, it's pretty hard to believe that a 14-year-old girl did all this shit. But in a video game, all of that is much more believable, especially if you're playing as the character. My major complaint here is they once again cut out a major encounter with the infected in the abandoned lumber mill, which was a pretty cool sequence. By this point in the show, you'll probably have even forgotten it's a fucking zombie IP, because zombies are really only a plot device in this show, much like The Walking Dead, which honestly is just lame. I've seen that shit before. I used to watch The Walking Dead regularly, even when it was kind of mediocre. I don't want to see that same crap again, just with a Last of Us coat of paint on it. And my other minor complaint is that Joel, once again, seems super weak here. Yes, it makes more sense considering he's still injured, but this was yet another missed opportunity of him killing at least a handful of people on his way to Ellie. That could have at least been kinda cool. Oh, and they completely dropped the ball on the fact that this sequence is supposed to take place during a blizzard. They throw a light smattering of snow in one shot, and that's pretty much it. I will say one minor cool detail of this episode is that Troy Baker does play Pedo Cannibal's right-hand man, so the actual real Joel at least is in the show, and he gets killed by Ellie, which there's something poetic about the fake Ellie killing the real Joel. So now we get to the finale of the show, and it starts right off with some unnecessary additional cringe as we see Ashley Johnson, the original Ellie, is playing Ellie's mother in the show, and she runs to some house in the country, which I believe is supposed to be the one from The Last of Us 2, And apparently she's fleeing a zombie while heavily pregnant with Ellie. She locks herself in a room, the zombie breaks in and bites her, she knifes it to death, and then gives birth to Ellie right there. Yeah, this is some soap opera tier writing bullshit. So later Marlene shows up. Ellie's mom makes her promise to take care of Ellie, as they were friends for life, and so Marlene mercy kills Ellie's mom, and then we get back to the present. This part also is pretty one-to-one with the game. It even has the draft moment, which was pretty nice. And once again, another encounter with the infected is cut out of the show, and instead, the Fireflies find the group, and the ending is almost one-to-one, except for one very important detail change that I hope you noticed. In the original version of the game, the ending was purposely left ambiguous as to whether or not the Fireflies would actually be able to produce a cure, which is pretty realistic. Much like we have yet to produce a cure for AIDS or cancer, or really any other number of things that we haven't yet figured out, right? Especially in an apocalypse scenario where we don't have access to all the same knowledge or technical skill that would certainly aid in producing a vaccine or whatever other type of cure they would need. Now, of course, this is a TV show for idiots, and Neil Druckmann wants you to hate Joel. That is exactly why he killed him in The Last of Us Part 2, and he has said multiple times in the past that we're supposed to view Joel as sacrificing all of humanity for one person. In fact, he says it in the creator commentary at the end of this episode.
We've seen Joel kill, we've seen him lose loved ones, so how do you take that any further? What if it's between saving all of humanity or this one girl? It's the easiest choice he's ever made in his life.
So they have now, in this version, inserted a line where Marlene explains why Ellie's immune.
Our doctor, he thinks that the cordyceps in Ellie has grown with her since birth.
Why is she in surgery?
It produces a kind of chemical messenger. It makes normal cordyceps think that she's cordyceps. It's why she's immune. He's going to remove it from her, multiply the cells in a lab, produce those chemical messengers, and then we can give it to everyone.
Now, you can already probably think of multiple problems with this. First of all, wouldn't that mean that all of the zombies would completely ignore her because she would effectively be one of their, hive mind or whatever? But we clearly see her being attacked by the zombies multiple times in this show. So I guess only the fungus itself knows she's one of them and not the zombies which are being controlled by the fungus? How does that work? You could also make the argument that why would cordyceps not grow inside her just because there's already existing cordyceps inside her according to the chemical messenger? Why couldn't there just be more fungus inside her body that would eventually kill her? Even if she didn't turn into a zombie, I would imagine that shit growing inside you would probably eventually kill you. Another arguable plot hole is that somehow the doctor, aka Abby's dad, knows exactly how Ellie is immune within hours. I mean, Joel is knocked out, which realistically he would only be knocked out for a few minutes unless he had permanent brain damage. But you can just call that a nitpick, whatever. Let's say he was out cold for a few hours, right? Somehow in that time, the doctor discovered exactly how Ellie's immunity worked. So I guess Abby's dad is a fucking super genius, and he probably would have saved humanity by the show's logic. Another plot hole I came up with after thinking for a while is that Marlene explains that they would reproduce more of these chemical messengers by multiplying the cells. If that's the case, even though it is attached to her brain, wouldn't they just be able to cut off a tiny piece of it just to reproduce more? Why would they have to kill her to reproduce more cells of this thing? You can't tell me their surgical skills have regressed to the point where they can't do this surgery non-lethally if they simultaneously also have super genius scientists that can figure out exactly what's wrong with her that fast. But honestly, at the end of the day, none of these arguable plot holes matter, because the real purpose of this additional plot point is to 1, remove the ambiguity of the ending, to make you hate Joel, like I mentioned, and 2, to subliminally tell you to trust the science. That scientists are like gods, and anything they come up with is indisputable fact The scientific method is fucking meaningless. If the government tells you something, it's correct. Now, I'm sure some people are going to call me a schizo over that one, but I'm telling you, that's exactly what they were going for, dude. You can choose to believe me or not. But the fact that they basically are telling you in your face that Joel doomed humanity by saving Ellie means that they believe that Abby's dad could have come up with a cure. Or at least with the assistance of all the other unnamed, unseen Firefly scientists that I guess exist or something. Now, if I had to complain about something else, I would also say the sequence where Joel fights his way to Ellie is also far less epic and engaging and interesting. In the game, it was such a tense, important moment because you want to do anything to save Ellie. Unless you're a psychopathic, antinatalist millennial, apparently there's a lot of those, and want Ellie to die just so that her life has meaning. How is it that a cynical, hateful bastard like myself has more of a heart than the average fucking Redditor, dude? And I hate to restate all of my points from the Last of Us remake, remaster video, but the point is, Ellie cannot consent. It doesn't matter if she thought that sacrificing her life for humanity was her choice. It's not. She's a child. Her brain is not finished developing, right? That's why kids can't consent, right? Some of you don't think women can consent till they're 25. So how can they consent to sacrificing their life? But again, if you remove the ambiguity and say, well, humanity would have absolutely been saved, then I might actually change my opinion around the ending. But you know what? I absolutely believe in death of the author, and honestly, Neil Druckmann isn't even the fucking author. That's the truth. Look into that shit. Bruce Straley is the author, and honestly, I believe Amy Hennig was more of an author of The Last of Us than Neil Druckmann. I refuse to attribute any good part of this franchise to him. We've seen what happens when he has full creative control, and I can't wait till all the normies see Season 2 and they get to realize what we saw in 2020, that Neil Druckmann is a fucking hack. That said, I am glad they stuck to the rest of the ending. Even with the change in ambiguity, I still was on Joel's side, and it still even made me tear up a little bit, even though Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are far inferior to the original versions of the characters. Joel still made the right choice, because I still don't believe in the capability of post-apocalyptic scientists to create a cure. And you know what, honestly, screw humanity. Care about the people who care about you, right? Joel cares about his family, and they care about him, and no one else gives a fuck in that heartless world. That's like the point of the story, honestly, for me. Everyone's trying to kill him, infected or human. So Joel's family are the only people who should matter to him. Humanity as a whole can go fuck itself. So final thoughts on The Last of Us Season 1. Like I said at the beginning, it's an almost good adaptation. I'd say as a whole, it's about 80% accurate to the parts of the game that were actually adapted, because plenty of it was cut out. Like I said, 95% of the combat encounters, possibly more. And Episode 3 was 0% accurate to the game, so honestly, it's maybe closer to 70% accurate to the game. And the fact that they covered the DLC means that 2 out of the 9 episodes had almost nothing to do with the overall plot. I really don't care about Ellie's backstory at all. Joel is the main character, no matter what anybody will tell you. Yes, Ellie and Abby are the main characters of the sequel, but the sequel sucks. Joel is the main character of The Last of Us. It's his story. Ellie is a fucking plot device that we, as the player base, grow to love like a daughter over the course of the game. That's the point. And that's another way that the show kind of just dropped the ball, because Joel and Ellie's relationship was not nearly as developed as the game. Now, of course, it never quite stood a chance, but if they had at least covered all the most important moments, it would have been a bit better than this. And again, I'm just going to leave out Bella Ramsey as a whole from that equation, but I do think, disregarding her looks, her acting is also somewhat questionable as well. I just think it's difficult for her to emote. Maybe it's part of her... I can't even fucking say this with a straight face. Whatever. You get what I'm trying to say. And Pedro Pascal's Joel is not Joel. He's a weak, emasculated, beaten down old man, instead of a hardened, killing machine who's closed his heart to everything because his daughter died, and he's been through some real shit. Horrible, horrible things. So of course he's not going to let himself love another person. That's partially why his and Tess's relationship was left ambiguous, at least that's what I believe, because he couldn't let himself love someone again. But then over the course of the game, he finally opens up his heart, and he can't sacrifice Ellie, right? That's the whole point of the story. How do you mess that up? And somehow I almost forgot to mention, you may notice, none of the major characters in this show are straight white males. Joel and Tommy are Hispanic, Bill and Frank are gay, Henry and Sam are black. I guess there was that one military guy who served alongside the short, shrill psycho woman, but he's certainly not a major character. I'm not even sure if he was given a name. And pretty much every other major character is female. And again, if you don't think that's intentional, you're either naive or you're lying. So Joel's race swap is even more important when you put it in this context. So yeah, I think that the midwit take on this show is going to be that it's the greatest video game adaptation ever because look at all these scenes and exact lines from the game. Okay, sure, but all of the finer details were screwed up, as I covered extensively. And episode 3 is just inexcusable. Seriously, how can you come up with any good reason as to why that's in this show? You can't. Not to mention it butchered one of the better one-off characters from the game. So at the end of the day, is it a terrible show? No. And like I said, I was watching this with my own mother, as some of you have been, and she enjoyed the show, so that's why I think a lot of the normies are going to end up enjoying this. But for people like me who actually did like the game, and yeah, it's not one of my favorite games, but I think it's one of the last truly great story games. Ironically, it's also been blamed for popularizing movie games that are now everywhere in the last 9 years. And I really had no expectations for a video game adaptation to be good, but it does infuriate me when people pretend it's way better than it actually is. It's definitely overrated, no question. So yeah, sure, it's not a terrible show. I probably could come up with good things to say about it, but I don't really see what the point is. For my audience, at least the people I'm trying to talk to when I make these videos, you can just play the game and get a much better experience than watching the show. So there's really no reason for the show to exist for people like you and me. So yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it probably is one of the better video game adaptations, but that does not mean it's good. So I guess I'll reluctantly call it an acceptable adaptation, but all of the political propaganda put such a bad taste in my mouth that I can't really recommend it to anybody. I despise all the wokeness crap, the fact that a game that is not even 10 years old yet, and don't think I didn't notice that Craig Mazin got that wrong in the commentary at the end.
The ending is something that people have been arguing about for over a decade.
It has to be modernized for the new far-left audience that it's trying to appeal to, all the crazy fucking woke shit. It's just gross to me. I've got really nothing else to say about it. I guess as a last note, I'm looking forward to the backlash against Season 2 of the show. See you next time, guys.